Well, hello. Welcome to another episode in the series on small stick stoves. As you can see today, it's a bit cooler than the last time I was out. I'm not wearing my infamous chili hat. I've moved into a small wool toque, and I've got 3 layers on right now. It's a cool day, but this also means it's going to be a good test of the stove that I have for you today. So in my last video, when we looked at the Lixada wood gasification stove, I had said at the end of that video that the next video I do would probably be the last in this short series, and it would be what I was going to call the ultimate stick stove. Well, this is not that video. And the reason is, in the last week, I had a surprise arrive rather early in the mail. And what it was is a small wood stove that I had ordered from eBay, and it arrived from China in record time, to be quite honest. And I picked up this stove intentionally after one of my other videos. You may recall I had one where I had a small wood stove that I complained that it wouldn't stay together, and it was a smaller version of an Emberlit. And what I found on eBay was a newer version, strangely enough also by the brand Lixada. And in this case it is hinged, and then there's a pin holding the fourth side together, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a minute. And I thought this is a good opportunity to bring the two stoves out, put them side by side, and show you the pros and cons of both of these. And before you spend your money, I have some real definite opinions on these stoves, so I think you might want to watch this and see if it's something for you. Alright, let's take a look at the stoves. Okay, I'm just going to take a few seconds to show you the stoves so that I can get my meal going. It's rather cold and I want to get some soup on. So the first stove that I have is the one that you may recall from one of my visits to the Susie Lake. It's a small stove made of stainless steel. And the way this assembles, and I am going to show it to you disassembled, but the way it goes together, the tabs on the corners are all facing in the same direction, making for a very unstable stove that falls apart at the slightest touch. And in fact, during the video that I had shot, it actually did fall apart while there was fire burning in it. I was able to prop it up with, I think it was a rock behind it, and I was able to get through my lunch, but I was quite put off by the stove at that point. And for that reason, when I show you this stove a little later and show you it in its disassembled pieces, don't buy this stove. Just quite frankly, don't buy this stove. They're not expensive, but they're not worth whatever you're going to pay for them. I think I paid probably $8 or $9 when I originally bought this stove, and thought it was a nice little stove. It seemed to look like it would work well, but as soon as I tried to assemble it, even before it started warping, I found that it just would not stay assembled. So much so that what I had to do is where the bottom plate comes out through the side of the bottom of the stove, I actually drilled holes on both sides and took a small piece of stainless steel skewer and bent the sides in ever so slightly and used those skewers to hold the stove together. In other words, if I was holding this stove without those skewers in it right now, the thing would just literally fall apart in my hands. So it's a small stove. It looks like it would be very convenient, very light. You know, it is a nice light stove. It doesn't burn too badly. There is some caveats with that I'll explain, but yeah, I can't recommend this stove. However, brand new and shiny. Branded Lixada. I've seen it done under other brands as well, but this one is slightly different from the others. One of the features on this one, and I'll show you this one disassembled, is the fact that the hinging is held together with a pin that runs through the hinge point right there. So the stove stays together, goes together very easily, and right now my hands are cold. So fiddling with a stove that doesn't go together easily is not a lot of fun when you're cold. So you want something that's going to go together very easily without a lot of fiddling. It seems to be going to be much stabler. Now, time will tell. As you can see, there's been no fire in this stove yet at all. So time will tell when it warps if it's still going to work as well as it did just putting it together now. There's one other portion of it, and you can't see it together because I haven't set it up, but I'm going to shut it up and show you in just a few seconds. And that is, this had an optional plate. Now, both of them came with little bowls that would set into grooves higher up. And the little bowls were designed for either a solid fuel tablet or an alcohol gel, maybe even liquid alcohol, so that you can rest your pot over it and use an alcohol source as opposed to burning wood. The bowls really, I didn't use them. I haven't used them. I tried them once, but I just didn't find it very effective. However, this stove didn't come with one of the little bowls. It came with a plate that will set into the insets that's designed to hold a Trangia stove in it. Now it's only 3/4 clearance from the top of the trangia to the top of the stove, so it's not quite the mythical 1 inch, which is supposed to provide the best burn times, but it's pretty close, and it looks like it might work out well. Again, I haven't used it, I haven't tried it, but well, we're going to start today. I think I'll show you the setup with the trangia in it, just to show you what that looks like before I get my lunch going. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I'm going to get my lunch going because I'm cold. All right, I don't think I mentioned that where I'm at today on Fox Lake. I'm at the north end of the lake, but I'm not quite in an area that's well protected from the wind, so I'm finding that there's quite a bit of wind here, quite a bit of wind noise, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me clearly. So what you're looking at now is the stove with the plate dropped into the top, and it drops in quite easily. And I'll just drop the trangia stove in, and you can see that I've got a dual-purpose stove, and that's one of the nicer things about this. It's a dual-purpose stove in that if I don't feel like setting a small wood fire inside of it, and I just want to get a brew on very quickly, I can just use my little trangia stove or my trangia knockoff made by Alex. And yeah, so it's a nice dual-purpose stove. But I'm going to quickly get this one set up, put its first fire inside, get my soup on, and we'll talk a little bit more about these. So the stove is doing very well so far. Got a nice little stack of oak splits feeding it. Seems to be drafting pretty well, better than maybe in the past. I think it's probably the position I have it. I do have a bit of a wind block from the north wind, but the wind is coming around the corner and it seems to be feeding it quite well. Got my 12 centimeter zebra billy pot sitting on top. Water getting hot very quickly for lunch, but yeah, so far I'm having a good experience with this stove. But it does mean, and of course, as usual, a steady supply of small sticks to give it a feed because they burn through very quickly. But it does mean, though, you'd have to have good dry wood to keep this going, and you have to give it a lot of attention. But so far, so good. All right, I'm just about ready to eat. So I finished my lunch and disassembled the stove, and I thought I'd just show you the two of them disassembled. Actually, that's one of the nice things about these little stoves. Lightweight stainless steel. There was just a few embers in the bottom, which I turned over and threw the rest of my water on to make sure it was out. But it cooled off within a minute. It was very, well, of course it is only 2 degrees Celsius out, so that didn't help. But yeah, it cooled off very quickly. So there's the original stove I had put together. A little case that I made for it, 2 stainless steel pins that help hold it together. The component parts I had mentioned, if you look closely you'll see that the tabs are all running in the same direction. And as a result, when you assemble it, if you grab any one side of it or if you tip it in any way, it just automatically disassembles and falls apart. So a nuisance, at least. Dangerous if you have a pot of water on it at the time. So here's the other one. Now the other one did come with a nice little case, very similar to what I made, better though. I didn't use the trangia ring today, so that's why it's looking brand new and clean. But there's the stove after its first burn. It came apart easily. Warping didn't seem to affect it yet. Now, you know, one of the things that I was concerned about was this little pin. This is what holds it together at the hinge. And I was worried I might lose it. And it came with this little stainless aircraft wire on it that to keep it in place. And I don't think it was intended to stay on the stove, but you know what? It works just fine. I have very low likelihood of losing it, at least for the time being. Again, this is not a long-term review. This is first burn. Really can't gather too much from that. It did work well, but I have a few reservations. Oh, there's my hot chocolate. That's what I decided to have, is hot chocolate. So I think I'll enjoy that before it cools off too much, and I'll bring you back with some final thoughts. You know I love a good cup of coffee. Obviously I've gone through a lot of effort to make coffee in the woods, but every so often when it's cold, a cup of hot chocolate hits the spot just perfectly, and today's one of those days. I'm enjoying this immensely. Great way to cap off an otherwise wonderful meal. Well, I thought I'd give you a few closing thoughts on the little Lixada folding wood stove, and I'm probably going to entitle this video A Tale of Two Stoves. They're almost identical in design as far as size goes and the shape of the plates that make up the stove, but it's the fact that one was virtually just designed wrong in terms of the tabs not going together in a way that would keep it locked together. And the other one was hinged together and went together, assembled very easily, disassembled just as easily. Very little chance of losing the parts, very little chance of it coming apart. But that's not all that goes into making a good stove. I don't see any warping yet, but again, this is first burn. It was hot. You know, first burn, I'm not going to get too much of a final impression out of that. But a couple of observations, and it's about these small stoves in general. I've come to the conclusion that size does matter when it comes to these small stoves, especially if it's not one of the gasification designs. There has to be a certain amount of critical mass, is the way I'm going to say it, and heat and height to the stove to create draft that'll keep the flame going. Now, when I lit the stove, and you saw that earlier, it burned very well. It drew in through the wide port, and it's got a bit of a large feed port, and that may be hampering it as well. But it drew well. But the moment I put my pot on it, the 12 centimeter zebra billy pot on it, it dampened the flames down dramatically. I suppose I could create a T-bar assembly similar to what comes on the emberlit and then sit that on top of it, but it kind of defeats the purpose of the stove. You know, in order, you know what I mean, to create a little bit of a height. So, can I recommend these stoves? They're not bad. I think this stove I'll carry primarily in my kit with my Trangia knockoff, and its primary function is going to be to support the Trangia and use it as a bit of a windscreen and pot support for the Trangia, with a secondary use as a wood stove. So it's not going to be a primary use as a wood stove. I know that it will work as a wood stove, but I think in general it's limited in how quickly. It took a long time to bring the water to a hot enough, and it was water from the lake, so yes, it was cold, but I needed to bring it to a boil to ensure its safety, and it took a long time, much longer than it should have. So I can't recommend them from a primary stove point of view. What I can say about them is that they're a nice little backup. They work well with the Trangia if you get the right design, the Lixada design like I found. By the way, last night I looked on eBay before coming out this morning, and the price of these things now seems to have been increasing dramatically over the recent weeks. I bought that maybe 4 weeks ago, and that's what I meant about a quick delivery from China. 4 weeks is quick coming to Canada. It was about $12. Now I'm seeing them in around the $20 mark. So, you know, you're not saving a lot of money at that point. You're looking at, you might as well look at one of the gasification stoves. Yes, there's an issue with size, but they work that much better that, given the choice, I'd take the gasification stove any day. This just is not something that I would say is a primary use. It's effective, it did work, it just has a lot now, and I was working with really good wood, and I was on a good dry day. The ground is wet, but you know, I had everything going in my favor. Still, it took a long time. If I was looking to bring the water to a boil quickly for a hot cup of coffee, this is not the stove you grab. In the future, I'll probably use it to bring water to a boil using the Trangia in my little kit that I have assembled for that. So there you have it. Tale of two stoves. One stove, absolutely I cannot recommend in any way, shape, or form. The other stove I recommend with reservations. Handy, useful, not too expensive if you can find it at the better price, but limited in how and what it can do for you. Okay, so I think the next video will be the last video on stick stoves, and I'm hoping to call it the ultimate stick stove. So please come back and see that. In the meantime, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and share this with your friends. If it's something that you like and you comment that you do, that encourages me to create more. If you have other ideas you'd like me to talk about, interesting side story. On my way in today, one of the dog walkers I ran into, we had met some months ago, and I told him I was out here making YouTube videos. Well, apparently he's now a subscriber of mine, has watched every one of my videos, and he gave me some ideas. He wants to see more on wild edibles and wild medicinals. So we took a little walk along the shore looking for Labrador tea today. Now, for whatever reason, in the immediate area where I'm at, there's no Labrador tea, but it's plentiful around here, so I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to run into this guy again and show him some Labrador tea growing. But if that's something you're interested in, seeing those types of things, just say so, and I'll focus on those. Coming into the winter months, I do hope to get out as often as I can. You know, maybe it's because I'm a bushcrafter and not a hardcore survivalist. I'm not a wimp. I don't mind going out in the weather, but I do like to enjoy myself. So I'm not going to challenge myself to be out there when it's terrible blizzards if I don't have to. You'll see me out in the snow, absolutely. Hopefully I'll get out while it's snowing. But if it's minus 40 and a blizzard, you won't see me out there. I did enough of that when I was on duty for 36 years. Okay, folks. See you in the next video. And why don't you get out and explore? And when you come across that path in the woods you haven't taken before, take it. It'll make all the difference. Bye for now.